I stood in the bridal boutique fitting room holding a crumpled piece of paper with my daughter's handwriting scrawled across it in desperate blue ink. "Please don't tell anyone you're my mother. Just pretend you work here or something." 24 hours earlier, I had been good enough to pay for her dream dress. Now I was apparently too embarrassing to acknowledge as family. The irony cut deeper than any rejection I'd ever experienced, but the awakening that followed would change everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 51 years old. Until 3 days ago, I believed that being a devoted mother meant sacrificing every piece of my dignity, my social standing, and my self-worth to ensure my daughter could live the life she wanted without ever having to acknowledge where she came from. I thought unconditional love meant accepting unconditional shame, and that parental devotion required me to disappear into the background of my own child's life whenever it suited her narrative. I was catastrophically wrong about all of it. For the past 8 years, ever since my divorce from Isabella's father and my subsequent financial struggles, I had been operating under the devastating assumption that my 26-year-old daughter needed to be protected from the embarrassment of having me as her mother. Not just protected from my mistakes or my circumstances, but protected from my very existence in her carefully curated world. Isabella had graduated from Stanford with a degree in communications and a network of friends whose parents owned tech companies, investment firms, and luxury real estate developments in Marin County. She'd landed a job at a prestigious marketing agency in San Francisco, where she met other young professionals who summered in the Hamptons and considered a weekend in Napa Valley a casual getaway rather than a once-in-a-lifetime splurge. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs to keep my head above water. During the day, I managed the front desk at a dental office in Oakland, and 3 evenings a week, I cleaned office buildings downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, and it paid enough to cover my rent on a small apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The contrast between Isabella's ascending social trajectory and my own financial reality had created a chasm between us that grew wider every year. But instead of bridging that gap with honesty and authentic connection, I had chosen to enable Isabella's embarrassment by making myself as invisible as possible in her life. It started small, as these things always do. When Isabella was fresh out of college and beginning her career, she'd asked me not to mention my jobs when meeting her new friends. "It's not that I'm ashamed of you, Mom," she'd explained with the patient tone people use when they're absolutely ashamed but don't want to admit it. "It's just that people make assumptions, and I don't want my professional reputation to be affected by misunderstandings about our family's background." I had agreed because it seemed reasonable. Why should Isabella's career prospects suffer because her mother cleaned toilets for extra income? If keeping quiet about my work situation helped Isabella establish herself professionally, then discretion seemed like the loving thing to do. But discretion had gradually transformed into active deception, and active deception had evolved into complete erasure of my existence from Isabella's public life. When Isabella's college friends visited San Francisco, I was expected to make myself scarce. When she attended work events or networking functions, I was never mentioned as part of her support system. When she moved into her first apartment in the Mission District, she introduced me to her neighbors as the cleaning lady, rather than acknowledge our relationship. The financial support had escalated, along with the emotional erasure. Isabella's entry-level salary at the marketing agency was substantial by most standards, but insufficient to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to during college, when her father was still contributing significantly to her expenses. After the divorce, Richard had moved to Portland with his new wife and had gradually reduced his financial support, claiming that Isabella was old enough to be independent. This left me filling the gap between Isabella's income and her expenses, even though my own income was a fraction of what she earned. I covered the difference on her rent when she wanted to live in an expensive neighborhood. I paid for her gym membership, her monthly parking fees, and her health insurance premiums. I bought her groceries, covered her utility bills, and even contributed to her student loan payments when she wanted to minimize the impact on her monthly budget. All of this financial support was provided quietly, privately, and with the understanding that Isabella would never acknowledge its source to anyone in her social or professional circles. I was her secret benefactor, funding a lifestyle that explicitly excluded me from participation or recognition. My friends had started asking questions years ago. Diane from the dental office where I worked had stopped inviting me to weekend events because I was always broke from supporting Isabella's expenses. My neighbor Rosa had given up on planning girls' trips because I never had money left over for my own entertainment after covering Isabella's bills. Even my sister Patricia, who lived in Sacramento and saw Isabella maybe twice a year, had started making pointed comments about how rarely Isabella visited or called, and how she never seemed to mention me when posting about her life on social media. But I had explanations for everything. Isabella was building her career and networking was crucial for her success. She was under tremendous pressure in a competitive industry and needed to focus on making the right impressions. She was still young and figuring out how to balance her professional ambitions with family relationships. She was going through an adjustment period as she established her independence. I had convinced myself that this was what good mothers did in situations like ours. We sacrificed not just our comfort and financial security, but our dignity and our place in our children's lives so they could have opportunities we never had. I was being a loving, supportive parent by funding Isabella's social mobility, while remaining invisible enough not to complicate her upward trajectory. The truth was, I had become so busy being useful to Isabella financially that I had forgotten how to be meaningful to her emotionally. My own social life had been reduced to whatever interactions didn't interfere with Isabella's needs or schedule. The photography classes I'd wanted to take after the divorce never happened because Isabella needed help with her security deposit. The book club I'd considered joining got pushed aside when Isabella required assistance with her car payment. The online dating profile I'd briefly created was deleted when Isabella went through a difficult breakup and needed emotional support, which meant being available to listen while never mentioning my own loneliness or desire for companionship. Even my friendships had become secondary to Isabella's financial needs. I'd stopped making social plans because I never knew when Isabella might have an unexpected expense that required my contribution. I'd stopped pursuing hobbies because my free time was spent working extra hours to cover Isabella's lifestyle inflation. Looking back now, I can see that I had created a monster of my own making. Not because Isabella was inherently cruel or manipulative, but because I had systematically trained her to see me as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. I had taught her that my worth was measured by my ability to provide financial support while requiring nothing in return, not even basic acknowledgement of my existence in her life. Isabella had learned those lessons perfectly. And why?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Wouldn't she? I had been the most consistent and devoted teacher she'd ever had. The worst part wasn't even the money or the secrecy. The worst part was how completely I had disappeared from Isabella's story about herself. She talked about her achievements, her challenges, her goals, and her relationships as if she were entirely self-made. The financial support that enabled her lifestyle was invisible. The emotional support that helped her navigate professional and personal difficulties was unacknowledged. The sacrifices that made her comfort possible were unrecognized. I had become the ghost in Isabella's life story, present only when needed and invisible at all other times. When Isabella's friends asked about her family, she spoke vaguely about her father's business success and mentioned relatives in other states, but never described having a mother who loved her enough to work 2 jobs to subsidize her dreams. When Isabella faced professional challenges or personal disappointments, she'd call me for comfort and advice, but she'd never mention these conversations to anyone else. I was her private emotional support system, available for crisis management, but not suitable for public acknowledgement. I told myself this arrangement was temporary. I told myself that once Isabella was more established in her career and more confident in her social position, she'd be comfortable acknowledging our relationship. I told myself that the secrecy was protecting both of us from social complications that neither of us needed. I told myself this was love, when it was actually the complete absence of love. Real love doesn't require one person to erase themselves so the other person can feel comfortable. Real love doesn't demand invisibility as the price of support. Real love doesn't flourish in secrecy and shame. But I didn't understand any of this until Isabella got engaged. James Morrison was everything Isabella had been positioning herself to attract for years. He was 29, a software engineer at a well-funded startup, and came from the kind of established Bay Area family that had owned property in Palo Alto since before it became synonymous with tech wealth. His parents were both Stanford alumni who had invested early in several companies that had become household names. His sister was a pediatric surgeon married to a venture capitalist. His extended family included professors, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists whose names appeared on buildings and scholarship funds. James was, in short, Isabella's ticket to the social and economic class she'd been aspiring to join since college. He represented everything she'd been working toward: financial security, social status, and acceptance, into a world where people like me were invisible except when providing services. When Isabella called to tell me about the engagement, her excitement was intoxicating. She'd been dating James for 18 months, and while I'd heard his name mentioned frequently in our phone conversations, I'd never met him or been included in any discussions about their relationship milestones. "Mom, I have incredible news," Isabella had said, calling me at work during my lunch break. "James proposed last night at dinner in Napa Valley. We're engaged." I had felt genuine joy for her in that moment. Whatever our complicated relationship dynamics, I wanted Isabella to be happy and loved. The idea that she'd found someone who cherished her enough to commit to a life together filled me with maternal pride and relief. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I'd said, stepping outside the dental office so I could speak freely. "Tell me everything. How did he propose? Are you happy? Do you love him?" Isabella launched into a detailed description of the proposal: the exclusive restaurant, the custom-designed ring, the photographer James had secretly hired to capture the moment. She was radiant with happiness, and for a few minutes our conversation felt like the kind of mother-daughter connection I'd been craving for years. "We're thinking about a spring wedding," Isabella continued. "Something elegant, but not too large. James's family knows some beautiful venues, and we want to make sure everything is perfect." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'm so happy for you both. When do I get to meet James officially?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Isabella's mind working through the logistics of how to handle my existence in relation to her new fiancé. "Well, that's actually something we need to talk about," Isabella said carefully. "James doesn't know a lot about our family situation, and I think it would be easier for everyone if we kept things simple." "What do you mean by simple?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "I mean that James comes from a very traditional family, with certain expectations about social backgrounds and family stability. His parents are lovely people, but they have pretty conventional ideas about class and education and career success." "Isabella, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been presenting our family in a way that fits better with James's world, and I don't want to complicate things by introducing details that might create misunderstandings." The euphemism was so delicate, so carefully constructed, that it took me a moment to understand what Isabella was actually telling me. She had lied to James about who I was, what I did, and possibly even whether I existed. "What exactly have you told James about me?" I asked. "I've told him that you live in Sacramento, and that you're not very involved in my day-to-day life because of distance and different interests." "Sacramento? Isabella, I live 20 minutes away from you." "I know, but it seemed easier to explain your absence from my social life if there was a geographical reason." "And what did you tell him I do for work?" Another pause. "I told him you work in healthcare administration." It was technically true if you considered managing the front desk of a dental office to be healthcare administration. But I knew Isabella had chosen those words specifically because they sounded more professional than the reality of my situation. "Isabella, why couldn't you just tell him the truth?" "Because the truth is complicated, Mom. James's mother was a surgeon before she retired to focus on philanthropy. His father runs a biotech company. His sister is a doctor. Their friends are all doctors and lawyers and executives. How exactly was I supposed to explain that my mother cleans offices for extra money?" The shame in Isabella's voice was unmistakable, but it wasn't shame about our circumstances. It was shame about me, personally and specifically. She wasn't embarrassed by our financial situation. She was embarrassed by my existence. So what happens now? I asked. Do I just stay hidden forever? Not hidden, Isabella said quickly. Just discreet. Look, James proposed and we're planning a wedding and everything is perfect right now. I don't want to introduce complications that might affect how his family perceives me. Complications? Isabella, I'm your mother, not a complication. You know what I mean. James's family is going to be scrutinizing everything about me and my background. If they think I come from an unstable or lower-class family situation, it could affect how they treat me, how they include me in family events, how they talk about me to their friends. And you think having a mother who works 2 jobs makes you lower class? I think having a mother who cleans toilets for money doesn't exactly scream successful family background. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. For the first time in 8 years, Isabella was telling me directly how she viewed me and my place in her life. I wasn't just an inconvenience to be managed. I was an active liability to her social aspirations. Isabella, I work hard to support both of us. There's nothing shameful about honest work. I know that intellectually, Mom, but we don't live in a world where people judge families based on work ethic. We live in a world where people judge families based on job titles and income brackets and social connections. James's friends aren't going to think it's admirable that you clean offices. They're going to think it's evidence that our family isn't successful. Our family? Or just me? What do you mean? I mean, are you ashamed of our family? Or are you specifically ashamed of me? Isabella was quiet for a long moment. I'm not ashamed of you, Mom. I'm embarrassed by our situation. What situation? The situation where I'm trying to build a life with someone whose family has expectations about social class and background, and my actual background doesn't match those expectations. So you're going to lie about your background for the rest of your marriage? I'm going to present my background in the most favorable light possible. That's not lying, that's strategic communication. I realized that Isabella had been practicing strategic communication about me for so long that she'd convinced herself it wasn't deception. She'd created an entire alternate version of her family history that eliminated the inconvenient reality of who I actually was. What happens when James wants to meet me? I asked. He doesn't, really. I've explained that we're not very close because of geographical distance and different lifestyles. He's fine with that. And what happens at the wedding? What do you mean? I mean, am I invited to my own daughter's wedding? Isabella sighed as if I were being deliberately difficult. Of course you're invited. You're my mother. But I need you to understand that James's family will be paying attention to everything, and I need to make sure that my family presentation doesn't create problems for my marriage. What does that mean practically? It means that I need you to be discreet about your work situation. Maybe don't mention the cleaning job at all. Just say you work in healthcare administration if anyone asks. And what about where I live? Maybe just say you live in the East Bay. You don't have to specify Oakland. Oakland, apparently, was too working class for James's family expectations. The East Bay was vague enough to encompass more affluent areas like Berkeley or Walnut Creek. Isabella, you're asking me to lie about my entire life. I'm asking you to present yourself in a way that doesn't complicate my relationship. Is that really so unreasonable? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that from Isabella's perspective, it probably didn't seem unreasonable at all. She'd been managing my public presentation for 8 years, and I'd been cooperating with that management. Why should her wedding be any different? But something about the finality of marriage, the permanence of committing to a life built on deception about something as fundamental as family identity, made me question whether I wanted to continue participating in Isabella's shame about my existence. I need to think about this, I said. Think about what? Mom, it's not complicated. I'm asking you to be supportive during the most important time of my life. By pretending to be someone I'm not. By presenting yourself in the best possible light. Everyone does that at weddings. Everyone lies about their profession and their address. Everyone emphasizes their positive qualities and downplays potential areas of concern. Isabella had developed an entire philosophical framework for justifying her embarrassment about me. It wasn't deception, it was strategic presentation. It wasn't shame, It was social awareness. It wasn't rejection, it was protective management. I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine anger. Not disappointment or hurt or resignation, but actual anger at being asked to collaborate in my own erasure for the sake of Isabella's social comfort. That evening, I sat in my small apartment thinking about the conversation and trying to understand how we'd reached this point. When had Isabella's embarrassment about our financial circumstances transformed into embarrassment about my fundamental identity? When had my willingness to be discreet about my work situation become an expectation that I would lie about my entire existence? More importantly, when had I become so invested in Isabella's approval that I was willing to sacrifice my own dignity to maintain our relationship? The answers to those questions would require me to examine 8 years of choices, compromises, and gradual erosions of self-respect that had brought us to this moment. But first, I had to decide whether I was willing to spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone else so my daughter could feel comfortable acknowledging my existence. The wedding planning began immediately, and with it came a series of increasingly elaborate requests for me to modify my presentation for various events and interactions. The engagement party would be hosted by James's parents at their home in Atherton, and Isabella needed me to prepare a backstory that would satisfy their curiosity about her family without revealing any details that might lower their opinion of her background. Just remember, you work in healthcare administration in Sacramento, Isabella coached me over the phone. If anyone asks what specifically you do, just say you manage patient services at a medical practice. That's technically true. Isabella, I manage the front desk at a dental office. That's not patient services at a medical practice. It's close enough. And if anyone asks about Dad, just say he works in business consulting in Portland. Don't mention the divorce details or the financial complications. What if someone asks why I don't visit you more often? Tell them you have a busy schedule with work commitments and that we talk frequently but prefer to maintain our independence as adults. Isabella had thought through every possible conversation and prepared responses that would present our family as functional, successful, and socially appropriate. The elaborate nature of her deception was almost impressive, except that it required me to memorize lies about my own life. The engagement party was held on a Sunday afternoon in March, and I drove to Atherton feeling like an actor preparing for a performance. Isabella had insisted on reviewing my outfit choices in advance, rejecting several options as too Oakland or too working class, before approving a simple dress I'd borrowed from my sister Patricia. James's family home was exactly what I'd expected, a sprawling Victorian with meticulously maintained gardens and a view of the hills that probably cost more than I'd earn in a decade. Cars in the circular driveway included several luxury vehicles I recognized from advertisements, but had never seen up close. Isabella met me at the front door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a quick embrace that felt more like a performance than genuine affection. "Remember what we discussed," she whispered as she led me inside. "Healthcare administration in Sacramento. Busy schedule. Independent lifestyle." The house was filled with well-dressed people holding wine glasses and engaging in the kind of conversations I'd only heard in movies. James's mother, Patricia Morrison, approached us almost immediately with the confident smile of someone accustomed to managing social situations. "You must be Isabella's mother," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia. We're so delighted that James has found such a wonderful girl." "It's lovely to meet you," I replied, shaking her hand and hoping she couldn't tell how nervous I was. "Isabella speaks about James constantly. You've raised a remarkable young man." "Thank you. Isabella tells us you work in healthcare administration up in Sacramento. What type of practice do you work with?" I could feel Isabella watching me carefully, waiting to see if I would stick to the script or reveal the truth about my actual job. "I work with a dental practice," I said, which was true, "managing patient services and administrative operations." "How wonderful! Healthcare administration is such important work. And do you enjoy living in Sacramento?" This was the first direct test of Isabella's geographical lie, and I felt a moment of moral vertigo as I considered whether to continue the deception or tell the truth. "I actually live in Oakland," I said, unable to bring myself to lie about something so basic. Isabella must have misspoken about Sacramento. I saw Isabella's face freeze with panic, but Patricia Morrison didn't seem to notice the inconsistency. Oakland has become such a vibrant area, Patricia said diplomatically. Are you involved in the cultural scene there? Not as much as I'd like to be, I admitted. I work quite a bit, so I don't have as much time for cultural activities as I'd prefer. Of course, healthcare administration must be demanding work. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Patricia asking polite questions about my work, my interests, and my relationship with Isabella. I managed to navigate most of her inquiries without directly lying, though I was carefully vague about specifics that might reveal the truth about my cleaning job or my financial situation. When Patricia moved on to greet other guests, Isabella immediately approached me with barely contained frustration. "Why did you tell her you live in Oakland?" she whispered urgently. "I specifically said to tell people Sacramento. Isabella, I can't lie about where I live. What if someone wants to get together or sends me something? What if they find out I lied?" "You could have just been vague. You could have said the East Bay." She asked a direct question. I gave an honest answer. Your honest answer contradicted what I told them about our family geography. I looked at my daughter, dressed in an expensive outfit I'd helped pay for, surrounded by people whose approval she desperately craved, and realized that she was more concerned about maintaining her false narrative than she was about my comfort or dignity. "Isabella, maybe the problem isn't that I told the truth. Maybe the problem is that you lied in the first place." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger. "I didn't lie. I simplified a complicated situation to avoid unnecessary social complications. You told them I live in a different city. That's lying. It's strategic communication, and it's what I need from you to make this work." "Make what work?" "My relationship with James's family. My integration into their social circle. My future with James." "And what about your relationship with me?" Isabella looked genuinely confused by the question. "What about it? Don't you think it's problematic that your future happiness requires me to pretend to be someone I'm not?" "Mom, everyone adjusts their presentation for different social contexts. This isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about emphasizing your best qualities." "My best qualities apparently don't include my actual job, my actual address, or my actual life." Isabella sighed with the exasperated patience of someone dealing with an unreasonable person. "Your actual life is complicated in ways that don't translate well to James's family's social expectations. I'm trying to protect both of us from unnecessary judgment." "Protect both of us? Or protect yourself from association with me?" "That's not fair, Mom. I love you, and I want you to be part of my life. I just need you to be part of my life in a way that works with the other relationships I'm building. And if I can't do that, if I can't maintain this performance indefinitely," Isabella's expression hardened, "then we'll have to figure out alternative arrangements for how much you're involved in my married life." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Either I would cooperate with Isabella's deception about my identity, or I would be excluded from her future entirely. She was offering me a choice between dignity and relationship, between honesty and inclusion, between being myself and being her mother. Looking around the elegant house at James's successful, confident family, I understood for the first time how completely I had been erased from Isabella's version of her own story. I wasn't just being asked to minimize my presence. I was being asked to become a fictional character in the elaborate narrative Isabella had constructed about her background and family. The remainder of the engagement party passed in a blur of careful conversations and strategic omissions. I met James, who seemed genuinely kind but clearly had no idea who I actually was beyond the vague outline Isabella had provided. I spoke with his relatives, who asked polite questions about my life that I answered with increasing discomfort, as I realized how thoroughly Isabella had prepared them to expect a version of me that didn't exist. By the time I drove home to Oakland that evening, I felt like I'd spent the afternoon in an alternate reality where I was playing the role of Isabella's mother, rather than actually being her mother. The performance had been exhausting, not because it was difficult, but because it required me to deny fundamental aspects of my identity and experience. That night, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by the evidence of my actual life: bills from my second job, uniforms hanging in my closet, photographs of Isabella from when she was young and still proud to have me as her mother, and realized that I had a choice to make. I could continue participating in Isabella's shame about my existence, allowing her to present me as a fictional character who bore little resemblance to the woman who had raised her and supported her dreams. I could maintain the peace by accepting my assigned role as the invisible benefactor who funded her lifestyle while remaining hidden from her social world, or I could reclaim my identity, my dignity, and my right to exist authentically in my own daughter's life, even if that meant risking the relationship we'd built on deception and denial. For the first time in 8 years, I began to consider the possibility that love might require me to stop enabling Isabella's embarrassment about who I really was. The crisis that shattered everything came 3 weeks after the engagement party on a Thursday morning that should have been routine. I was at work, filing insurance claims at the dental office, when Isabella called in a state of panic that I hadn't heard since her college years. "Mom, I need you right now," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled hysteria. "Something terrible has happened, and I don't know what to do." My maternal instincts kicked in immediately, overriding the lingering hurt from our recent conversations. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is James okay?" "It's not physical, it's worse than that. James's mother wants to have lunch with you next week. She called me this morning and suggested we arrange a proper get-together so she can get to know you better before the wedding planning gets too intense." I waited for Isabella to explain why this was terrible news, but she seemed to expect me to understand the crisis without further elaboration. "Isabella, that sounds nice. She seemed lovely when I met her at the engagement party." "Mom, you don't understand. She wants to have lunch at her country club in Hillsborough. She wants to introduce you to some of her friends. She's planning to treat this like a proper social event where she shows off her new daughter-in-law's family." "And that's a problem because you can't sustain the healthcare administration story for an entire lunch with multiple people asking detailed questions about your work. Because her friends are going to want to know about your social connections and your background and your lifestyle. Because Patricia Morrison's idea of getting to know someone involves extensive conversation about family history, education, career achievements, and social involvement." I began to understand Isabella's panic. The brief, polite conversation I'd managed at the engagement party was entirely different from an extended social interaction where I'd be expected to maintain a complex fictional identity while being scrutinized by women whose entire social system was built on evaluating and categorizing people based on class markers. "What exactly are you worried will happen?" I asked. "I'm worried that you'll say something that contradicts the story I've told about our family. I'm worried that they'll ask questions you can't answer convincingly. I'm worried that they'll realize I've been lying about our background and that it will affect how James's family treats me. Isabella, the solution to this problem is simple. Just tell James the truth about my work and our situation. Then there won't be any lies to maintain." "I can't do that now. It's too late. If I admit I lied about something as basic as what my mother does for work, James is going to question everything else I've told him about our family. He's going to wonder what other deceptions I've been maintaining." "What other deceptions have you been maintaining?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, and I realized there were probably additional lies I didn't know about. "It's not important. What's important is that I can't tell James the truth now without damaging our relationship. So I need you to help me get through this lunch without creating problems." "How do you want me to help?" "I need you to be prepared for detailed questions about your work in healthcare administration. I need you to have specific answers about the medical practice you supposedly manage. I need you to be familiar with industry terminology and current healthcare issues." I felt a chill as I understood what Isabella was asking. She wanted me to study and memorize an entirely fictional professional identity so I could convincingly lie to James's mother and her friends for several hours. "Isabella, I can't do that. I don't know anything about healthcare administration beyond what I've picked up working at a dental office. If someone asks me detailed questions about medical practice management, I'm going to be exposed as a fraud immediately. Then learn about it. You have a week. Research healthcare administration online. Read industry publications. Prepare talking points about the challenges of managing a dental practice. You want me to spend my free time studying for a performance as a fake version of myself?" I want you to spend some time preparing so that this lunch doesn't destroy my relationship with James's family. And what if I refuse? Isabella's voice took on the cold tone she used when she was truly angry. Then I'll have to uninvite you from the lunch and explain to Patricia that you're dealing with work conflicts that prevent you from participating in wedding-related events. You'd rather lie about why I can't attend than tell the truth about who I am? I'd rather protect my relationship with James's family than create unnecessary complications that could affect my marriage. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the mundane reality of my actual work life, and realized that Isabella was asking me to choose between my dignity and my inclusion in her wedding preparations. Either I would become an actress playing the role of a fictional mother, or I would be excluded from the events leading up to the most important day of her life. I need to think about this, I said. There's nothing to think about, Mom. Either you're willing to help me navigate this situation or you're not. Either you care about my happiness enough to be flexible about social presentations, or you don't. Isabella had framed the issue in terms that made my refusal seem selfish and uncaring. She wasn't asking me to lie, she was asking me to care about her happiness. She wasn't demanding deception, she was requesting flexibility. She wasn't requiring me to deny my identity, she was simply asking me to emphasize different aspects of my experience. What if I can't pull it off? I asked. What if I say something wrong or contradict the story or make it obvious that I don't know what I'm talking about? Then we'll deal with the consequences when they happen. But at least we'll have tried to make this work, instead of just giving up because it's complicated. That afternoon, I found myself in the position of researching healthcare administration, so I could pretend to be an expert in a field I'd never worked in. I spent hours reading articles about medical practice management, memorizing terminology I'd never used, and trying to construct a believable backstory about my supposed career in an industry I knew nothing about. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. I was preparing to lie extensively to people I'd just met about my profession, my expertise, and my life experience, all so my daughter could maintain her deception about our family's social and economic status. But underneath the absurdity was a deeper question that I'd been avoiding for weeks. Why was I willing to participate in this charade at all? Why was I so invested in Isabella's approval that I would consider sacrificing my authenticity to maintain our relationship? The answer, I realized, was that I had spent 8 years training myself to prioritize Isabella's comfort over my own integrity. I had become so accustomed to minimizing my needs and accommodating her preferences that I had lost track of where reasonable compromise ended and self-erasure began. The lunch was scheduled for the following Thursday at the Hillsborough Country Club, and as the day approached, I felt increasingly anxious about the performance I was expected to deliver. Isabella had provided me with detailed coaching on how to discuss my fictional career, what to say about our family background, and how to navigate questions about my lifestyle and interests. Remember, you've been working in healthcare administration for 15 years, Isabella reminded me during one of our preparation calls. You started as a receptionist and worked your way up to practice manager. You handle patient scheduling, insurance coordination, and staff management. You're familiar with electronic health record systems and medical billing procedures. Isabella, what if someone asks me about specific software programs or industry regulations? What if they want to discuss healthcare policy changes or professional certification requirements? Just be general in your responses. Talk about the challenges of managing patient flow and coordinating with insurance companies. Most people don't want detailed technical information. They just want to understand what you do for work. And what about my address? Do I still live in Sacramento in this version? No, stick with Oakland. Patricia already knows you live in Oakland, so we can't change that now. But if anyone asks about your neighborhood, just say you live in the hills. Don't mention the specific area. Isabella had created an entire alternate version of my life that was similar enough to reality to be plausible but different enough to meet her social requirements. I lived in the Oakland Hills rather than a working-class neighborhood. I managed a medical practice rather than working at a dental office and cleaning buildings. I had professional responsibilities rather than survival-level employment. The morning of the lunch, I dressed in the most expensive outfit I owned, practiced my fake professional persona in the mirror, and drove to Hillsborough feeling like I was heading to an audition for a role I didn't want to play. The country club was exactly the kind of place I'd never been invited to, and would never have occasion to visit in my real life. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles, the grounds were meticulously maintained, and the dining room overlooked a golf course that probably cost more to join than I made in several years. Patricia Morrison was waiting for me in the lobby with two other women who were clearly part of her regular social circle. She introduced them as Helen Bradford, whose husband owned a chain of orthopedic clinics, and Susan Chen, a retired pediatrician who now served on the boards of several medical nonprofits. "Margaret, I'm so pleased you could join us," Patricia said warmly. "I thought it would be lovely for you to meet some of our friends who have backgrounds in healthcare. I knew you'd have so much in common." My heart sank as I realized that Patricia had specifically chosen lunch companions who would be able to engage in detailed, knowledgeable conversations about the healthcare industry. This wasn't going to be polite small talk about my supposed job. This was going to be an in-depth discussion with actual healthcare professionals who would immediately recognize if I didn't know what I was talking about. We were seated at a table overlooking the golf course, and Helen Bradford immediately began asking questions about my work experience. "Isabella mentioned that you manage a dental practice in Oakland," Helen said. "How large is the practice? How many providers do you work with?" I had prepared for this question and delivered the answer Isabella and I had rehearsed. "It's a mid-sized practice with 4 dentists and 2 dental hygienists. We serve about 800 active patients." "That's a good size," Helen nodded approvingly. "What practice management software do you use?" "We've been considering switching from our current system to something more integrated." This was exactly the kind of specific question I'd been dreading. I had no idea what practice management software existed, let alone which systems were considered superior or more integrated. "We use a fairly standard system," I said vaguely, hoping to avoid getting into specifics. "The doctors are happy with it, so we haven't felt the need to make changes." "But which system specifically?" Helen pressed. "I'm always interested in hearing about other practices' experiences with different platforms." I felt panic rising as I realized I had no credible answer to give. Isabella and I had prepared for general questions about healthcare administration, but we hadn't anticipated conversations with people who had actual expertise in medical practice management. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the exact name of the software," I said, trying to buy time. "I'd have to check when I get back to the office." Helen looked puzzled. "You don't know the name of your practice management software? That seems unusual for a practice manager." Susan Chen jumped into the conversation with what seemed like an attempt to help. "Margaret probably deals with so many different systems and platforms that it's hard to keep track of specific product names," she said diplomatically. But her attempt to rescue me only made things worse, because it revealed that my ignorance about basic aspects of my supposed job was obvious enough to require explanation. Patricia Morrison was watching this exchange with growing curiosity, and I could see her beginning to question whether my professional background was what Isabella had described. "Tell us about the challenges you face in dental practice management," Patricia said, steering the conversation towards safer territory. "I imagine patient scheduling must be complicated with multiple providers." This was a question I could answer based on my actual experience at Dr. Rodriguez's office, so I felt more confident as I described the complexities of coordinating appointments, managing patient flow, and handling insurance authorizations. "The insurance coordination is definitely the most time-consuming aspect," I said, drawing on my real knowledge. "Every plan has different coverage requirements, and patients don't always understand their benefits until they're facing a large bill." "That's exactly what we hear from our office manager," Helen agreed. "Have you found that electronic health records have improved insurance processing, or do you still deal with a lot of manual verification?" Again, I was faced with a question that required specific knowledge I didn't possess. My work at the dental office involved basic insurance verification, but I had no experience with electronic health record systems or advanced practice management processes. "We're still working on optimizing our electronic systems," I said, hoping this sounded like a reasonable response. "Which EHR system are you using?" Susan asked. "We've been thinking about upgrading, and I'd love to hear about your experience with implementation." I was trapped. These women were asking legitimate professional questions that any actual healthcare administrator would be able to answer easily. My inability to provide specific information about basic industry tools was making it increasingly obvious that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm not directly involved in the technical aspects of our EHR system, I said desperately. That's handled more by our clinical staff. Helen and Susan exchanged a look that suggested they found my responses strange. Practice managers were typically very involved in electronic health record systems, since those systems affected every aspect of office operations. Patricia Morrison seemed to sense that something was wrong with my answers, but she couldn't identify exactly what the question and delivered the answer Isabella and I had rehearsed. It's a mid-sized practice with 4 dentists and 2 dental hygienists. We serve about 800 active patients. That's a good size, Helen nodded approvingly. What practice management software do you use? We've been considering switching from our current system to something more integrated. This was exactly the kind of specific question I'd been dreading. I had no idea what practice management software existed, let alone which systems were considered superior or more integrated. We use a fairly standard system, I said vaguely, hoping to avoid getting into specifics. The doctors are happy with it, so we haven't felt the need to make changes. But which system specifically? Helen pressed. I'm always interested in hearing about other practices' experiences with different platforms. I felt panic rising as I realized I had no credible answer to give. Isabella and I had prepared for general questions about healthcare administration, but we hadn't anticipated conversations with people who had actual expertise in medical practice management. I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the exact name of the software, I said, trying to buy time. I'd have to check when I get back to the office. Helen looked puzzled. You don't know the name of your practice management software? That seems unusual for a practice manager. Susan Chen jumped into the conversation with what seemed like an attempt to help. Margaret probably deals with so many different systems and platforms that it's hard to keep track of specific product names, she said diplomatically. But her attempt to rescue me only made things worse, because it revealed that my ignorance about basic aspects of my supposed job was obvious enough to require explanation. Patricia Morrison was watching this exchange with growing curiosity, and I could see her beginning to question whether my professional background was what Isabella had described. Tell us about the challenges you face in dental practice management, Patricia said, steering the conversation toward safer territory. I imagine patient scheduling must be complicated with multiple providers. This was a question I could answer based on my actual experience at Dr. Rodriguez's office, so I felt more confident as I described the complexities of coordinating appointments, managing patient flow, and handling insurance authorizations. The insurance coordination is definitely the most time-consuming aspect, I said, drawing on my real knowledge. Every plan has different coverage requirements, and patients don't always understand their benefits until they're facing a large bill. That's exactly what we hear from our office manager, Helen agreed. Have you found that electronic health records have improved insurance processing, or do you still deal with a lot of manual verification? Again, I was faced with a question that required specific knowledge I didn't possess. My work at the dental office involved basic insurance verification, but I had no experience with electronic health record systems or advanced practice management processes. We're still working on optimizing our electronic systems, I said, hoping this sounded like a reasonable response. Which EHR system are you using? Susan asked. We've been thinking about upgrading, and I'd love to hear about your experience with implementation. I was trapped. These women were asking legitimate professional questions that any actual healthcare administrator would be able to answer easily. My inability to provide specific information about basic industry tools was making it increasingly obvious that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm not directly involved in the technical aspects of our EHR system, I said desperately. That's handled more by our clinical staff. Helen and Susan exchanged a look that suggested they found my responses strange. Practice managers were typically very involved in electronic health record systems, since those systems affected every aspect of office operations. Patricia Morrison seemed to sense that something was wrong with my answers, but she couldn't identify exactly what the do was so, and they asked detailed questions I couldn't answer. I'm pretty sure they figured out that I don't know what I'm talking about. What kind of questions? Isabella asked, her voice tight with worry. Questions about specific software systems, electronic health records, Industry regulations, professional training. Questions that any real healthcare administrator would be able to answer easily. What did you tell them? I tried to be vague, but that just made it more obvious that I don't have the expertise I was claiming to have. Isabella, your future mother-in-law's friends now think I'm either incompetent at my job or lying about what I do for work. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Maybe they'll just think you're not very knowledgeable about the technical aspects of healthcare. Isabella, I couldn't name the practice management software I supposedly use every day. I didn't know basic information about electronic health records. I had no idea what qualifications are typically required for healthcare administration positions. No one is going to think I'm simply not technical. They're going to think I'm a fraud. So what do we do now? We tell James the truth about my work before his mother tells him that something seems suspicious about my professional background. I can't do that. If I admit I lied about what you do for work, James is going to question everything else I've told him about our family. He's going to wonder what other deceptions I've been maintaining. What other deceptions have you been maintaining? Isabella hesitated. It's not important. Isabella, if there are other lies that are going to be exposed, I need to know about them now. There aren't any other major lies. Just small adjustments to make our family background seem more compatible with James's expectations. What kind of adjustments? I may have exaggerated Dad's success in business consulting. I may have implied that our family has more financial stability than we actually do. I may have suggested that you and I have a closer relationship than we really have. I felt sick as I understood the scope of Isabella's deception. She hadn't just lied about my job. She'd created an entire fictional version of our family that bore little resemblance to reality. Isabella, you've built your entire relationship with James on lies about who we are. I've presented our family in the best possible light to avoid unnecessary complications. You've created a fantasy family that doesn't exist. I've emphasized our positive qualities and minimized potential areas of concern. And what happens when James discovers the truth? What happens when he realizes that everything you've told him about your background is fabricated? He won't discover the truth if you help me maintain the presentation we've established. Isabella, I can't maintain a presentation that requires me to be an expert in a field I know nothing about. I can't pretend to have professional qualifications I don't possess. I can't sustain conversations with actual healthcare professionals about an industry I'm not part of. Then what do you suggest we do? I suggest you tell James the truth about my work and our financial situation before his mother tells him that your mother seems to be lying about her career. And risk destroying my relationship with the man I want to marry? Better to risk your relationship with honesty than guarantee its destruction with lies that are already falling apart. Isabella was quiet for several minutes, and I could practically hear her weighing her options. What if we modify the story slightly? She said finally. What if we say you work at a dental office, but emphasize the administrative aspects of your role? That's technically true, and it explains why you're not familiar with broader healthcare industry issues. Isabella, that's not the story you told James. You told him I work in healthcare administration at a medical practice, not that I'm a receptionist at a dental office. So we'll say I misspoke about the specifics. We'll say you work in dental administration rather than general healthcare administration. And what about the cleaning job? Don't mention the cleaning job at all. There's no reason James needs to know about your second job. Because you're ashamed of my second job. Because my second job isn't relevant to our relationship or our wedding planning. Isabella, my second job is relevant to our relationship because it's part of how I've been supporting your lifestyle for the past 8 years. What do you mean? I mean that the money I earn cleaning offices has been subsidizing your rent, your expenses, and your ability to maintain the social position that attracted James in the first place. Isabella was quiet again, and I realized she had never connected her lifestyle with my financial sacrifices. She had accepted my support as if it were a natural resource rather than the product of my labor in jobs she considered beneath acknowledgement. I didn't realize you were using money from your cleaning job to help with my expenses, she said finally. Isabella, where did you think the money was coming from? Did you think I could afford to contribute hundreds of dollars every month to your lifestyle on a dental receptionist's salary? I guess I never thought about the specific sources of your financial support. Because thinking about the sources would have required you to acknowledge work you consider shameful. It's not that I consider your work shameful. It's that I consider it irrelevant to James's perception of our family's social status. My work is only irrelevant if you don't count me as part of your family. Isabella's sharp intake of breath suggested that my comment had hit closer to the truth than she wanted to admit. Of course I count you as part of my family. Do you? Because you've created a version of our family for James that doesn't include the real me. You've replaced me with a fictional character who has my name but none of my actual experiences or characteristics. I've presented you in a way that emphasizes your positive qualities. My positive qualities apparently don't include anything about my actual life, my actual work, or my actual experiences. Your actual experiences are complicated in ways that don't translate well to James's social expectations. Isabella, my actual experiences include working 2 jobs to support your dreams, sacrificing my own social life to contribute to your expenses, and loving you enough to fund a lifestyle that explicitly when you needed money for rent or expenses or emergencies, I worked extra hours and took on additional jobs to provide it. When you needed emotional support but couldn't acknowledge my existence to your friends, I made myself available while remaining invisible. When you needed a mother who wouldn't complicate your social aspirations, I learned to disappear from your public life. Isabella was crying now, though I couldn't tell if it was from guilt, frustration, or fear about her relationship with James. I don't know how to fix this, she said through her tears. I don't know how to tell James the truth without losing him. Maybe you start by asking yourself whether you want to be with someone you can't be honest with about your own family. But I love him. Do you love him? Or do you love the social status he represents? I love him, Isabella said firmly. I love who I am when I'm with him. I love the life we're planning together. I love the future we could have. And does that future include room for the real me? Or only for the fictional version you've created? Isabella didn't answer immediately, and in that silence I found the answer to questions I'd been avoiding for months. I need some time to think, Isabella said finally. About what? About how to handle this situation without destroying my relationship with James. Isabella, what if the only way to handle this situation is to be honest about who we really are? Then I guess I need to decide whether I'm willing to risk my future happiness for the sake of honesty about our past circumstances. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the conversation and realizing that Isabella was facing the same choice I'd been avoiding, the choice between authenticity and acceptance, between dignity and approval, between being loved for who she was and being loved for who she pretended to be. The difference was that Isabella had built her entire relationship with James on the foundation of lies about our family, while I had the option of rebuilding my relationship with Isabella on the foundation of truth about who I actually was. But first, I had to decide whether I was willing to risk losing Isabella entirely in order to reclaim my right to exist authentically in her life. And Isabella had to decide whether she was willing to risk losing James in order to build a marriage based on honesty rather than deception. The next few days brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls from Isabella, as she tried to figure out how to manage the fallout from the disastrous lunch with Patricia's friends. Patricia had apparently mentioned to James that she found some of my responses about my work unusual, and James had begun asking Isabella questions about my professional background that she was struggling to answer consistently. He wants to know why you weren't familiar with basic healthcare management software, Isabella told me during one of these calls. He works in tech, so he understands that software platforms are fundamental tools that professionals use every day. He can't understand how you could be managing a medical practice without being familiar with the systems that run the practice. What did you tell him? I told him that you're more focused on patient services than technical operations. But he said that doesn't make sense because practice management is inherently technical. Isabella, James is right. Your fictional version of my job doesn't make sense to anyone who knows anything about healthcare or business management. So what am I supposed to tell him? You're supposed to tell him the truth. I can't tell him the truth without admitting that I've been lying to him for our entire relationship. Then maybe you should ask yourself why you entered a relationship that required you to lie about your family. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to be with someone who came from the kind of family I wished I came from. It was the first completely honest thing Isabella had said about her motivations, and it revealed the depth of her dissatisfaction with our actual family circumstances. Isabella, you can't build a marriage on the foundation of wishing you had a different family. Why not? People reinvent themselves all the time. People move to new places and create new identities and build new lives that aren't limited by their backgrounds. But James isn't marrying your new identity. He's marrying you. And if your new identity is based on lies about fundamental aspects of who you are, then he's not really marrying you at all. He's marrying the person I want to be. But are you the person you want to be if becoming that person requires you to be ashamed of your own mother? Isabella didn't answer, but I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. I don't know how to be proud of our family, she said finally. I don't know how to present our circumstances in a way that doesn't make me feel diminished in comparison to James's background. Maybe the problem isn't our circumstances. Maybe the problem is that you're trying to marry into a social class that requires you to deny where you came from. But I love James. I know you do, but do you love yourself? Do you love the version of yourself that's so ashamed of me that she can't acknowledge my existence honestly? Isabella was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. I don't know who I am without the story I've created about our family. Then maybe it's time to find out. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected way possible. I was working my evening cleaning job at a downtown office building when I encountered James Morrison in the lobby, apparently leaving a late meeting with clients whose offices were on the 15th floor. He recognized me immediately, despite seeing me in my cleaning uniform, rather than the careful outfit I'd worn to his engagement party and the country club lunch. "Mrs. Chen?" he said, looking confused. "What are you doing here?" I was holding a bucket of cleaning supplies and wearing a uniform with the cleaning company's logo prominently displayed. There was no way to pretend I was there for any reason other than the job Isabella was so desperate to keep secret. "I work here," I said simply, deciding in that moment that I was done lying for Isabella's comfort. James looked from my uniform to my cleaning supplies to my identification badge, clearly trying to process what he was seeing. "You work here as a cleaner?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. 3 evenings a week, I confirmed. "This is my second job." "Your second job? I thought you worked in healthcare administration." "I work at a dental office during the day, managing the front desk and patient scheduling. I clean office buildings in the evenings to earn extra money." James was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to reconcile this information with what Isabella had told him about my professional background. "Isabella said you manage a medical practice," he said finally. "Isabella said a lot of things that aren't quite accurate," I replied. "I think you and she need to have a conversation about our family's actual circumstances." James nodded slowly. "I think we do." We stood in the lobby of the office building, and I realized that this chance encounter had accomplished what weeks of Isabella's careful deception management couldn't. It had forced the truth into the open in a way that couldn't be explained away or minimized. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did Isabella feel like she needed to lie about your work?" It was a fair question, and one that cut to the heart of everything that had been wrong between Isabella and me for the past 8 years. "Because she's ashamed of me," I said simply. "She's ashamed of my work, my financial situation, and my social status. She's been trying to create a version of our family that would be acceptable to your family and your social circle. But why would she think my family wouldn't accept her mother, working honest jobs to support herself and her daughter?" I looked at James, this kind young man who genuinely seemed confused by Isabella's deception, and realized that maybe the problem wasn't his family's social expectations. Maybe the problem was Isabella's assumptions about what those expectations were. "I don't think Isabella ever asked whether your family would accept me as I am," I said. "I think she assumed they wouldn't, and she built an elaborate fiction to avoid finding out." James nodded thoughtfully. "My mother mentioned that some of your responses at lunch seemed inconsistent with your supposed professional background." She was confused, not judgmental. She couldn't understand why someone would claim expertise they didn't possess. "Because Isabella asked me to pretend to be someone I'm not so I wouldn't embarrass her in front of your family." "And you were willing to do that?" It was my turn to be quiet for a moment. "I was willing to do that because I love my daughter, and I wanted to support her happiness." but I'm not willing to do it anymore. Why not? Because I realized that pretending to be someone else for Isabella's comfort wasn't actually supporting her happiness. It was enabling her shame about who she really is. And shame isn't a foundation for happiness. James considered this. Isabella seems to think that my family has certain expectations about social class and professional status. Do you? Not really. My parents care about character and kindness and authenticity. They want me to be with someone who makes me happy and who I can build a good life with. They don't care whether that person's mother is a doctor or a janitor. Have you told Isabella that? I've tried to. But she seems convinced that my family's background means they'll judge her family's background. I don't think she believes me when I tell her it doesn't matter. We stood there in the lobby, and I felt a moment of clarity about what had gone wrong between Isabella and me. She had been so afraid of rejection based on our circumstances that she had rejected herself, and in doing so she had rejected me. James, I think Isabella needs to decide whether she wants to marry you as herself, or as the fictional character she's created. And you need to decide whether you want to marry the real Isabella, or the version she's been presenting. James nodded. I want to marry the real Isabella. I just need to figure out who that is underneath all the stories she's been telling. That night, James called Isabella and told her about our encounter in the office building. According to Isabella, it was the most difficult conversation of their relationship, but also the most honest one they'd ever had. Isabella called me the next morning, and for the first time in years, she sounded like the daughter I remembered from before social status became more important than family connection. Mom, I owe you an apology, she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. I owe you a much bigger apology than I think I'm capable of giving. Tell me what happened with James. He told me about seeing you at the office building, and I tried to explain why I'd asked you to lie about your work. The more I tried to explain it, the more ridiculous it sounded. I realized that I'd been asking you to be ashamed of yourself, so I could avoid being ashamed of myself. And how did James respond to the truth? He was confused about why I thought his family would care about what you do for work. He was hurt that I'd lied to him about something so fundamental. And he was angry that I'd asked you to participate in deception that was obviously painful for you. What did you tell him? I told him the truth about everything. About your jobs, about our financial situation. About how I've been so embarrassed by our circumstances that I tried to create a different family history entirely. How did he react? He said he was disappointed in me for being so focused on social status that I was willing to lie to him and humiliate you. He said he'd rather marry someone whose mother cleans offices and loves her daughter than someone whose mother is a doctor but whose daughter is ashamed of her family. I felt tears starting to form as I understood that James had seen something in our relationship that Isabella had been blind to, that my love for her was worth more than any professional credentials I might possess. What happens now? I asked. Now I have to figure out how to apologize to you for 8 years of treating you like you weren't good enough to acknowledge publicly. Now I have to figure out how to rebuild a relationship with James based on honesty instead of the lies I've been telling him for 2 years. And now I have to figure out how to live with myself knowing what I put you through because I was too cowardly to stand up for my own family. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, listening to my daughter's voice break as she tried to process the enormity of what she had done to both of us. For the first time in 8 years, Isabella sounded like she was seeing our relationship clearly, without the filter of social anxiety and status consciousness that had distorted her perception for so long. Isabella, I forgive you, I said quietly. But forgiveness doesn't erase the impact of what happened. We have a lot of work to do if we want to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. I know. I don't even know where to start. Start by telling me who you really are, underneath all the performances and personas you've been maintaining. Tell me what you actually want from life, not what you think you should want based on social expectations. Isabella was quiet for a long time. I don't know if I remember who I really am, she said finally. I've been performing the role of the successful young professional for so long that I'm not sure what's authentic and what's just habit. Then we'll figure it out together. But this time, we'll figure it out honestly. The first step in rebuilding our relationship was Isabella's decision to tell James's family the complete truth about our regents' circumstances. She called Patricia Morrison and asked if they could have lunch together, just the two of them, so Isabella could clarify some misunderstandings about her family background. Patricia, according to Isabella's account of their conversation, was gracious and understanding about the deception. She explained that she had suspected something wasn't quite right about my responses during our lunch at the country club, but she had assumed I was simply nervous or uncomfortable in that social setting, not that I was trying to maintain a fictional professional identity. Mrs. Morrison said she wished I had felt comfortable being honest from the beginning, Isabella told me after their lunch. She said James's family doesn't care about social status or professional prestige. They care about character and authenticity and how people treat each other. How did you respond to that? I cried, Isabella admitted. I realized that I had created this elaborate deception to avoid rejection that probably would never have happened. I had been so afraid of being judged for our family's financial situation that I never gave them a chance to accept us as we are. And now? Now I have to live with the knowledge that I spent 2 years lying to the man I want to marry because I was ashamed of the woman who sacrificed everything to help me build the life that made me attractive to him in the first place. Isabella's remorse was genuine, but I knew that regret alone wouldn't be sufficient to repair the damage that had been done to our relationship. We needed to establish new patterns of interaction based on honesty, respect, and mutual appreciation. Isabella, I want you to understand something important, I said. I'm not just hurt because you lied about my work or asked me to pretend to be someone else. I'm hurt because you treated me like I was a liability to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. I know, I see that now. Do you? Because understanding it intellectually is different from feeling it emotionally. For 8 years, you made me feel like I was an embarrassment you had to overcome rather than a mother you were proud to have. Isabella started crying again. I was proud of you. I am proud of you. I just didn't know how to be proud of you in front of other people. Why not? Because I was so insecure about my own worth that I thought your circumstances reflected badly on my value as a person. I thought people would see your financial struggles and assume I wasn't worth knowing or investing in professionally or personally. It was the most honest assessment Isabella had ever given of her motivations, and it revealed how deeply her shame about our family had been rooted in her own self-doubt. Isabella, your worth as a person has nothing to do with my job title or my income level. Your value doesn't increase or decrease based on whether I clean offices or manage hospitals. I know that now, but for years I felt like I had to compensate for our family's lack of social status by being more successful, more polished, more impressive than people from wealthier backgrounds. I felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove I deserved the same opportunities and respect. That may be true, but working hard to achieve your goals is different from being ashamed of the people who supported those goals. You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for making you feel like you weren't good enough to acknowledge publicly. We talked for another hour, and I began to understand how Isabella's insecurity about class and status had poisoned her ability to appreciate what we had accomplished together. She had been so focused on what we lacked compared to wealthier families that she had lost sight of what we had achieved despite our financial limitations. Isabella had graduated from Stanford without student debt because I had worked extra jobs to help with her expenses. She had been able to take unpaid internships and build professional connections because I had continued to supplement her income after graduation. She had been able to maintain the social lifestyle that attracted James because I had prioritized her needs over my own financial security for years. But instead of seeing these sacrifices as evidence of love and devotion, Isabella had seen them as reminders of our family's economic inadequacy. She had been embarrassed by the source of the support that made her success possible. I want to make this right, Isabella said as our conversation wound down. I want to find a way to honor what you've done for me instead of hiding it. What does that look like practically? It looks like introducing you to people as my mother, who worked 2 jobs to help me through college and support my career development. It looks like acknowledging publicly that my success is built on your sacrifices. It looks like being grateful instead of resentful about our family's financial situation. And what about James? What does rebuilding trust with him look like? Isabella sighed. That's going to be harder. He said he needs time to process the fact that I lied to him about something so fundamental to who I am. He said he's not sure he can trust me to be honest about other important things if I was willing to deceive him about my own family. Is he calling off the engagement? He's not calling it off, but he's postponing the wedding until we can work through the trust issues I created. He said he wants to marry me, but he wants to marry the real me, not the fictional version I've been presenting. That seems reasonable. It is reasonable. It's also terrifying because I'm not sure I know who the real me is anymore. Over the following weeks, Isabella began the difficult process of deconstructing the persona she had built and rediscovering the authentic person underneath. She started therapy to address her issues with shame and social anxiety. She had honest conversations with James about her fears and insecurities. And most importantly, she began rebuilding her relationship with me based on genuine appreciation rather than reluctant obligation. The first major test of our new dynamic came when Isabella asked if I would be willing to meet with James's parents for dinner at their home, not as the fictional healthcare administrator I had pretended to be, but as myself, Margaret Chen, dental office receptionist and part-time office cleaner who had worked multiple jobs for years to support her daughter's dreams. "I want them to know who you really are," Isabella explained. "I want them to understand what kind of mother I have and what kind of sacrifices you made to help me get where I am today. Are you sure you're ready for that level of honesty?" "I'm sure. I spent so much energy trying to hide our circumstances that I never gave James's family a chance to appreciate what we actually accomplished together. I want them to know that I had a mother who loved me enough to work cleaning jobs so I could focus on my studies and career development." The dinner was held on a Sunday evening in May, and I arrived at the Morrison home feeling cautiously optimistic about the possibility of authentic connection rather than elaborate performance. Isabella had coached me not to prepare a false persona, but simply to be myself and trust that honesty would be sufficient. Patricia and Robert Morrison were waiting for us in their living room, and Patricia immediately approached me with what seemed like genuine warmth rather than the polite courtesy I had experienced during our previous interactions. "Margaret, I'm so glad Isabella suggested this dinner," Patricia said. "I feel like we got off to a complicated start, and I'd love the opportunity to get to know you properly." "I'd like that too," I replied. "And I owe you an apology for the confusion during our lunch at the country club. I should have been honest about my work instead of trying to maintain a professional identity I don't actually possess." "Please don't apologize," Patricia said graciously. "Isabella explained the situation, and I understand why you felt pressured to present yourself differently. I'm just sorry that you felt like you couldn't be yourself around us." Robert Morrison joined our conversation and immediately began asking questions about my work at the dental office, but his questions were genuinely curious rather than judgmental or testing. "How long have you been working in dental administration?" he asked. "About 12 years, I replied. "I started there part-time when Isabella was in high school, and it became full-time after my divorce. It's honest work, and I enjoy helping patients navigate their treatment and insurance issues." "And Isabella mentioned that you work a second job as well?" 3 evenings a week, I clean office buildings downtown. It's not glamorous work, but it allowed me to help Isabella with college expenses and career development without taking on debt that would have limited our options. Instead of the uncomfortable silence I had feared, Robert nodded approvingly. "That's impressive dedication. Isabella is fortunate to have had that level of support while she was establishing herself professionally." The conversation continued throughout dinner, and I found myself talking openly about my work, my financial situation, and my relationship with Isabella, without feeling the need to apologize or minimize any aspect of my experience. Patricia and Robert asked thoughtful questions about my job responsibilities, my career goals, and my interests outside of work. Most importantly, they expressed genuine appreciation for the sacrifices I had made to support Isabella's education and professional development. They seemed to view my willingness to work multiple jobs as evidence of maternal devotion rather than as a sign of economic inadequacy. "Margaret, I hope you know how much Isabella values what you've done for her," Patricia said as we finished dinner. "She talks about your support and encouragement constantly. It's clear that your relationship is built on deep mutual love and respect." I glanced at Isabella, who was smiling with what appeared to be genuine pride, rather than the anxious management I had grown accustomed to during social interactions. "Isabella is a remarkable young woman," I replied. "I'm proud of what she's accomplished, and I'm grateful that she's found someone like James who appreciates her authentic self." After dinner, James asked if he could speak with me privately on the back patio, while Isabella helped his parents with dishes. "Mrs. Chen, I want to thank you for being honest tonight," he said as we sat on their deck overlooking the garden. "This is the first time I feel like I'm meeting Isabella's real family instead of a performance designed to meet some imaginary social expectations." "How do you feel about Isabella's real family?" I asked. James smiled. "I think Isabella's real family is much more interesting and admirable than the fictional version she created. I respect what you've accomplished, and I understand why Isabella is such a strong, determined person. She learned those qualities from you." "And how do you feel about Isabella's deception about our circumstances?" James was quiet for a moment. "I'm hurt that she felt like she couldn't trust me with the truth about her background. I'm disappointed that she thought I would judge her based on her family's financial situation. But I also understand that her insecurity about class and status was affecting her judgment. Do you think you can rebuild trust with her?" "I think so, if she continues to be honest about who she really is. The woman I fell in love with is strong, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to the people she cares about. Those qualities make sense now that I understand what kind of family environment shaped her." "What kind of family environment is that?" "An environment where love was demonstrated through sacrifice, where hard work was valued over social status, and where authentic connection mattered more than public presentation." James had understood something about our family dynamic that Isabella herself had lost sight of over the years, that our circumstances had created strength rather than weakness, character rather than liability. The wedding was rescheduled for the following spring, giving Isabella and James time to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty, and giving Isabella and me time to establish new patterns of interaction based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence and social anxiety. During the months leading up to the wedding, Isabella made several significant changes in how she approached our relationship and her own life. She started acknowledging me publicly as her mother and talking openly about my support for her education and career development. She began contributing financially to household expenses instead of expecting me to continue subsidizing her lifestyle. Most importantly, she started treating me as a person whose thoughts, feelings, and experiences mattered independently of their utility to her social aspirations. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Isabella still occasionally showed signs of anxiety about social perceptions, and I sometimes found myself falling back into patterns of self-sacrifice that prioritized her comfort over my own dignity. But we were both committed to building a relationship based on authentic connection rather than obligation and performance. The most significant breakthrough came in October when Isabella asked me to accompany her to a work event where she was receiving an award for her campaign work with local small businesses. In the past, Isabella would never have invited me to a professional event where her colleagues and clients would be present. "I want people to meet my mother," she told me when she extended the invitation. "I want them to understand that my success is built on the foundation of your support and sacrifice. I want to be proud of our family publicly instead of hiding our circumstances." The event was held at a downtown hotel, and Isabella introduced me to her colleagues, clients, and industry contacts as her mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support her education and career development. She spoke openly about my jobs at the dental office and cleaning company, framing them as evidence of dedication and work ethic rather than as sources of embarrassment. "My mother taught me that there's dignity in any honest work," Isabella said during her acceptance speech. "She showed me that love sometimes means working extra jobs so your children can focus on their dreams. She demonstrated that success isn't about the prestige of your profession, but about the integrity with which you approach your responsibilities." I watched my daughter speak about our family with genuine pride, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction with who I was and what I had accomplished. Isabella was finally seeing our relationship clearly, without the distortion of shame and social anxiety that had characterized her perspective for so long. After the event, several of Isabella's colleagues approached me to express their admiration for my dedication to her education and career development. They seemed genuinely impressed by what I had sacrificed to help Isabella achieve her goals, and they treated me with the respect and appreciation I had been craving for years. "Mrs. Chen, Isabella is lucky to have had such supportive parents," one of her clients said. The work ethic and determination she brings to our projects clearly comes from growing up in a family that values dedication and sacrifice. For the first time in nearly a decade, I felt proud of my role in Isabella's life rather than apologetic about my limitations. I was being recognized not despite my circumstances, but because of what those circumstances had enabled me to provide for my daughter. The wedding took place on a beautiful Saturday in April, and it was everything Isabella had dreamed of, but in ways she hadn't originally anticipated. Instead of being a performance designed to demonstrate her successful integration into James's social class, it became a celebration of authentic love and family connection. During the planning process, Isabella had insisted on acknowledging my contributions to her success in ways that honored our relationship rather than hiding it. The wedding program included a note thanking me for years of sacrifice, support, and unconditional love that made this day possible. Isabella's maid of honor speech described me as her role model for determination, resilience, and devotion. Most meaningfully, Isabella had asked me to give a blessing during the ceremony, something that would have been unthinkable during the period when she was trying to minimize my presence in her life. "I want you to speak about love and sacrifice and what it means to build a life together," Isabella had explained when she asked me to participate in the ceremony. "I want our guests to understand that successful relationships require the same kind of dedication and hard work that you demonstrated in raising me." Standing before Isabella and James and their family and friends, I spoke about the love that motivates sacrifice, the strength that comes from supporting each other through difficulties, and the joy that emerges when people choose authenticity over performance in their most important relationships. Marriage, like parenthood, requires you to prioritize someone else's well-being without losing sight of your own worth, I said, looking at Isabella and James. It requires you to be honest about who you are and generous about who your partner is becoming. It requires you to build a life together that honors both your individual identities and your shared commitment. As I spoke, I realized that Isabella and I had learned these lessons together over the past year. We had discovered how to prioritize each other's well-being without sacrificing our own dignity. We had learned to be honest about who we were, and generous about who we were each becoming. We had built a relationship that honored both our individual experiences and our shared love. The reception was a joyful celebration where I felt completely included and appreciated, rather than tolerated or managed. James's family welcomed me warmly, Isabella's colleagues treated me with respect, and Isabella herself seemed genuinely proud to have me as her mother rather than anxious about my presence. During the mother-daughter dance, Isabella whispered in my ear, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Thank you for loving me enough to demand better from our relationship. Thank you for teaching me that authenticity is more valuable than approval." "Thank you for finding the courage to be yourself," I whispered back. "Thank you for choosing love over fear. Thank you for remembering that I'm your mother, not your liability." As we danced, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year earlier, I had been holding a note asking me to pretend I wasn't Isabella's mother. Now I was dancing with my daughter at her wedding, celebrated and acknowledged as the woman who had helped make her success possible. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. It had required both of us to examine our assumptions, challenge our fears, and choose difficult honesty over comfortable deception. It had required Isabella to risk James's rejection by telling him the truth about our family, and it had required me to risk Isabella's anger by refusing to continue enabling her shame. But the relationship we had built through that difficult process was stronger, more authentic, and more satisfying than the dynamic we had maintained through 8 years of careful management and strategic deception. Isabella had learned that love doesn't require perfection or social status. She had discovered that authentic relationships are built on honesty rather than performance. She had realized that her worth as a person wasn't diminished by her family's financial circumstances. I had learned that supporting someone doesn't require erasing yourself. I had discovered that love sometimes means setting boundaries, rather than providing unlimited accommodation. I had realized that my value as a mother wasn't measured by my willingness to disappear when my presence became inconvenient. Together we had learned that family relationships thrive on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared appreciation, rather than on financial dependence, social anxiety, and carefully managed presentations. 6 months after the wedding, Isabella called me with unexpected news. She and James had been discussing their future, and they wanted to ask me to consider moving into the guest house on their property in Palo Alto. They were planning to start a family within the next few years, and they wanted me to be actively involved in their children's lives as a grandmother who was valued and respected rather than hidden and managed. "We want you to be close enough to be part of our daily lives," Isabella explained. "We want our children to know their grandmother as the strong, dedicated woman who worked multiple jobs to help their mother achieve her dreams. We want them to understand that their family includes people who demonstrate love through sacrifice and hard work." The offer represented everything I had hoped for during the years when I felt invisible in Isabella's life: inclusion, appreciation, and acknowledgement of my contributions to our family's success. "Are you sure you want me that close?" I asked, still somewhat incredulous at the transformation in our relationship. "Mom, I've spent the past year learning to be proud of you, instead of ashamed of our circumstances. I want to spend the next phase of my life making up for the years when I treated you like you weren't good enough to acknowledge publicly." "You don't need to make up for anything. You just need to continue being honest about who we are and what we mean to each other." "I can do that," Isabella said. "In fact, I want to do that. I want our children to grow up in a family where love is demonstrated through action, where hard work is valued over social status, and where authenticity matters more than appearances." As I considered Isabella's invitation, I realized that she was offering me the chance to participate fully in the family I had helped create, through years of sacrifice and support. She was inviting me to move from the margins of her life to the center, from being a secret benefactor to being a celebrated grandmother. But most importantly, she was asking me to be myself completely and unapologetically, without performance or pretense or careful management of social perceptions. "I'd love to be part of your family," I told her, "not as a supporting character in your life story, but as a full participant in the life we're building together." "That's exactly what I want," Isabella replied. "I want you to be yourself, and I want to be proud of that self, and I want our children to understand that their grandmother is someone worth knowing and celebrating." Today, I live in the guest house behind Isabella and James's home, and I wake up every morning knowing that I am valued for who I am, rather than tolerated despite who I am. Isabella introduces me to people as the mother who worked 2 jobs to support her education, and she does so with pride rather than anxiety. James treats me as a respected member of their family, rather than as an obligation he inherited through marriage. Most importantly, Isabella and I have built a relationship based on mutual appreciation rather than financial dependence and social management. She contributes to household expenses, asks about my work and interests, and includes me in decisions that affect our family. I support her goals and dreams while maintaining my own identity and dignity. We learned that love doesn't require perfection, but it does require honesty. We discovered that family relationships flourish when built on respect rather than shame. We found that authenticity creates stronger connections than any carefully constructed performance ever could. Looking back on the woman I was when I held that note, asking me to pretend I wasn't Isabella's mother, I can hardly recognize the person who was willing to erase herself for someone else's comfort. That woman had confused enabling with loving, accommodation with support, and invisibility with devotion. The woman I am now understands that real love requires you to see and appreciate people as they actually are. Real support helps people grow stronger rather than keeping them dependent. Real devotion honors relationships with honesty rather than protecting them with deception. Isabella learned similar lessons about herself and about what she wanted from life. She discovered that social status built on lies is fragile and unsatisfying. She realized that authentic relationships are more valuable than impressive presentations. She found that pride in your family comes from appreciating what you've accomplished together, not from hiding what you've overcome. Our story isn't unique, but our resolution is uncommon. Many families maintain dysfunctional dynamics for decades, choosing familiar patterns over difficult honesty. Many people sacrifice authenticity for acceptance, dignity for approval, truth for comfort. Isabella and I chose differently. We chose to risk our relationship in order to save it. We chose to demand better from each other and from ourselves. We chose authenticity over performance, respect over accommodation, and love over fear. The result is a family built on the foundation of who we actually are, rather than who we think we should be. It's a relationship that honors both our individual worth and our shared commitment to each other's well-being. It's a love that sees clearly, appreciates deeply, and celebrates authentically. Standing in my daughter's kitchen this morning, watching her prepare breakfast for her family while her 18-month-old son plays at my feet, I feel complete satisfaction with the choices we made and the relationship we built through the courage to be ourselves with each other. Isabella's son will grow up knowing his grandmother as a woman who worked hard, loved deeply, and never apologized for either. He'll understand that families are built through dedication and sacrifice, that love is demonstrated through action, and that authenticity creates stronger bonds than any pretense ever could. This is the legacy we chose to create together, not perfection, but honesty, not status, but character, not performance, but love in its most genuine form. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.